That takes us to Order of the Day 1, Address in Reply. On the motion, to His Excellency the Honourable Christopher John Dawson, Companion of the Order of Australia, Australian Police Medal, Governor in and over the State of Western Australia and its dependencies in the Commonwealth of Australia. May it please Your Excellency, we, the members of the Legislative Council of the Parliament of Western Australia in Parliament assembled, beg to express our loyalty to our most gracious Sovereign and thank Your Excellency for the speech you have been pleased to deliver in Parliament. And the question is, the motion be agreed. Before I give the call to the Honourable Peter Collier for his valedictory speech, I remind members and guests that the usual courtesies and conventions of this chamber apply in the course of this speech.
President.
The Honourable Peter Collier.
Okay, over the last few months, as I've reflected upon the potential content of my valedictory speech, I almost delved back to where it all began, and that is my hometown of Kalgoorlie. As puerile as it might sound, my motivation to embark on a political career, along with teaching and tennis, was shaped by Jonathan, an inspiring young seagull created by Richard Bach in his mystical little book titled Jonathan Livingston Seagull. I first read Richard Bach's fable as a 15-year-old. I was immediately inspired by its theme of breaking through from societal expectations and limitations and pursuing our own goals. If you ask any of my former students or athletes or athletes or others with whom I have worked, they'll automatically associate Jonathan's wisdom with my messages. For some reason, as an ambitious teenager with clearly defined aspirations, Bach's message was really struck a chord with me, and I developed a resolute mind that I was going to become a teacher, play Davis Cup for Australia and represent the Liberal Party in the Legislative Council. And I will accept 2 out of 3 as a pass. With this in mind, having taught and coached tennis for almost a quarter of a century, my parliamentary career officially commenced in the Legislative Council on the 22nd of May 2005. My first day in the Legislative Council was on Tuesday the 24th of May 2005, and I delivered my inaugural speech on the 25th of May. In that speech, I spoke of my dedication to education in regional and Western Australia, amongst other themes, and I included by referring to an often used affirmation to which I have always committed, with that being to view life as a series of opportunities as opposed to a series of events. I intended to continue with that mindset as I commenced my parliamentary career. From the very first day, I was in awe of the overall fabric of the Legislative Council and the constant energy that permeated from the chamber. Given the heavy focus of attention being placed on education throughout the community at the time, I salivated at the numerous opportunities to engage in debate with the multiple problem areas that were consuming the sector. In early 2006, I was appointed Shadow Minister for Education and Training, which provided me with considerable avenues to engage with the entire education sector to supplement my parliamentary work. In addition, as a member of the Standing Committee on Legislation, we were tasked with reviewing numerous bills which provided me with a steep learning curve on the legislative process. Also, I'd been approached by a group of disaffected workers who felt that they'd been manipulated and exploited by the owner of a private training business. Following a lengthy debate in the Legislative Council in June of 2007, through a motion that I moved, the combined efforts of the Liberal Party and the Greens established an inquiry into the Bulga Works training saga through the Estimates on Financial Operations Committee, with myself as a substitute member. The year-long inquiry produced a number of excellent recommendations which were accepted by the government. In short, the disaffected workers received their lost wages and significant changes were implemented to improve the probity arrangements with contracts between the Education Department and private training providers. These outcomes would never have been achieved if it hadn't been for the efforts of one of the Legislative Council's standing committees. My involvement with each of these committees reinforced me the value that they have in the parliamentary process. While some governments may appear to resent the role of committees and regard them as a hindrance to their agenda, I've always felt that they actually enhance and improve the political procedure. I continue to hold this view, as I did when I was Leader of the House, when multiple bills were referred to the Legislation Committee to review. While I was thoroughly enjoying my first term in the Legislative Council, the ultimate aim of any political party is to spend as little time as possible on the opposition benches. What I wasn't expecting was the brevity of my time in opposition. As history will record, the then Labor Premier Alan Carpenter attempted to exploit the disunity of the Liberal Party at the time, and in August 2008 called an election, almost 8 months earlier than scheduled. To say that the Liberal Party was not prepared for an election would be an understatement. We had very little accumulated funding, campaign funding, and many seats were without an endorsed candidate. Regardless, remarkably, we won that election and attention was immediately directed toward the composition of the ministry. Having spent nearly a quarter of a century as a teacher, having spent the previous 2 years in the Parliament totally focused on education, and having developed a raft of extensive policies, it was widely anticipated that I would be appointed as the new Education Minister. Consequently, when incoming Premier Colin Barnett informed me that I would be the Energy and Training Minister, rather than being delighted, I felt a combination of shock and disappointment. However, these feelings of self-indulgence were very short-lived. I was a Minister of the Crown and I approached my new challenges with relish. To me, the energy portfolio was one of those genuine opportunities in life of which I previously mentioned. I had previously potentially been at risk of being pigeonholed as being exclusively education-focused. My new role would assist me in diversifying my knowledge and skill set. Having said this, my overall understanding of the energy sector was limited to the replacing of a light bulb, so it was vital that I establish a knowledge base as soon as possible. As with any government department, it is not vital that a minister have a total understanding of the minutiae of the portfolio, nor become consumed with the operational mechanics of the area. However, developing a broad understanding of the sector and the issues that would be likely to emerge was imperative. Energy has been one of those areas that the community tended to take for granted. In the past, the only time they gave it any serious consideration was when the lights went off. With this in mind, as incoming Minister for Energy, I was faced with a complex set of problems. Firstly, due to capacity issues, the previous summer was beset by a shortage of electricity and ordinary Western Australians were asked to limit their air conditioning usage over peak periods and industry reluctantly accepted forced shutdowns. Secondly, an explosion at the Apache Energy Varanus Island gas processing facility in the Pilbara in June 2008 cut Western Australia's domestic gas supply by over 30%. This had created a significant shortage of gas for industry and had a negative impact upon industrial processing, manufacturing, residential use and electricity generation. This incident exposed the state's vulnerability in terms of a reliable energy sector due to our heavy dependence upon gas at the time. Thirdly, there had not been a tariff increase for a decade, meaning there was a massive deficit in terms of cost-reflective electricity prices, with a report to government recommending an increase of over 50% in 2009 to 2010, followed by a further increase of 26% the following year to bring household electricity prices into line with costs. Finally, multiple problems with the disaggregation process of Western Power had emerged. In particular, Verve Energy had tabled enormous losses, largely due to the lack of tariff increases which needed to be addressed. Coupled with these issues was the overarching global debate surrounding climate change. It didn't take me long before I was captured by the dynamic issues surrounding energy. I immediately sought the advice and support of some experts in the field. Premier Colin Barnett was a former Minister for Energy and he was a valuable source of support. I also took counsel from a number of experts in the field, as well as having tireless briefings from the Office of Energy, Synergy, Verve Energy, Western Power and Horizon Power. The challenges that confronted the government to secure a reliable energy source were profound. A key focus was how we were going to respond to gas shortages exposed through the Varanus Island explosion. In addition, there were a number of issues with regard to the gas market which I needed to address. As a novice in the field, it was imperative that I embrace the gas sector in making decisions which would have an impact upon the industry. With this in mind, in January 2009, I established the Gas Supply and Emergency Management Committee, comprised of the gas producers and retailers, gas users, including electricity generators and networks, representatives from the Dampier-Bunbury Pipeline Limited, the Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the Chamber of Minerals and Energy, and government representatives. The committee was tasked to review and provide advice to government on the state's gas security, gas supply, disruption management and mitigation options for gas supply disruptions. The committee reported in September 2009, and as a result of its recommendations, the independent market operator was selected to operate a permanent gas bulletin board and to develop a gas statement of opportunities. Both initiatives have been called for by the gas industry and were extremely well received by the sector. And President, I'll seek leave to table a copy of that report. Consistent with another recommendation as Minister for Energy, in May 2011 I approved a long-term arrangement between Verve Energy and the APA Group that would lead to the development of the Mondara gas storage facility near Dongra, to provide an additional gas supply of up to 150 terajoules a day for a 30-day period in the event of another disruption to supply from the North West Shelf. This storage facility was completed in September 2013. The decision to refurbish Muja A and B was made to ensure gas energy security and diversity in the Swiss over the short to medium term, and in particular to reduce the reliance on gas during summer months. The genesis of a refurbishment or extension of the life of Mudgera A and B originated in 2006-2007, following the former Labor government's decision to retire the plant in order to meet the generation cap of 3,000 megawatts, imposed on Verve Energy as part of the disaggregation of the old Western Power. Verve Energy received approximately 10 unsolicited offers in relation to the future of the asset post the designated retirement date of April 2007. In February 2007, Verve Energy capacity was 3,480 megawatts. The former Labor government supported Verve Energy's request for proposal process that was specifically designed to identify a life for Mudgera AB post its notional retirement date of April 2007. In March 2007, Verve Energy retired the 2,040 megawatt Mudgera AB plant. In May 2008, they advised Denelco that their proposal was preferred. In June 2008, in response to the Varanus Island explosion, the then Minister for Energy announced that Mudgera AB would return to service to reduce diesel usage and free up gas supplies. In July 2009, I announced the refurbishment of Mudgera AB. The project was estimated to cost $150 million and will be completed by October 2012, with all 4 units operating as a 240 megawatt Midwest plant. The project was a joint venture between Verve Energy and Enelco, referred to as Vinelco. Following an explosion in one of the 4 boiler units in July 2012, problems with the joint venture emerged when Enelco was unable to contribute its share of the additional costs to complete the refurbishment. These problems intensified when the condition of the remaining boiler units was found to be worse than initially expected. The joint venture was ultimately terminated, with Verve Energy taking responsibility for the project. The final cost of the refurbishment was significantly higher than originally forecast, largely driven by the boiler repair cost and the capacity credit refunds, although refurbishment was the best available option at the time. The refurbishment was completed in February 2014 and the plant operated until its retirement on the 1st of October 2017, achieving profits in both 2015 and 2016. Finally, with regard to Mudgera, contrary to the assertion in the Langalot report, the Treasury was not aware of the joint venture. I once again refute that claim. As per evidence that I provided to the Legislative Council on the 12th of June 2018, both Treasury and the Auditor-General were aware of and supported the arrangement between Verve Energy and Enelco. Turning to gas. On the 27th of June 2012, I opened 2 new high-efficiency gas turbines at Verve Energy's Kwinana Power Station. This represented an investment of $263 million by the Liberal National Government to ensure security of energy supply. At the time, these units were the first of their kind to become operational in Australia and represented the latest in gas turbine technology. The machines added 200 megawatts of flexible, efficient, gas-fired generation to Western Australia's power system. Moving on, while Western Australia had a dependency upon gas and coal for energy generation for many years, there had been a growing desire throughout the global community to adopt more low-emissions, cleaner energy sources. The renewable energy sector was at its infancy when the Liberal National Government took office in 2008. One of the mechanisms to promote the renewable energy sector was through the feed-in tariff, which provided a subsidy to householders with photovoltaic wind and micro-hydro systems. After considerable consultation and assessment of the existing schemes in other jurisdictions, on 27th of May 2010, I announced a net feed-in tariff scheme at 40 cents per kilowatt hour on electricity exported into the South West interconnected and regional grids. This model was determined from extensive community consultation and assessment of models from other Australian jurisdictions. It served the dual purpose of reducing household electricity bills and significantly enhancing direct community involvement in the move to a cleaner energy future. The $23 million originally allocated to the scheme would limit the number of households eligible to access the financial incentive. However, it was anticipated that it would significantly stimulate the rooftop solar market. Following a review by the Office of Energy, I announced changes to the scheme in May 2011, increasing the initial budget from $23 million to $114.5 million over 4 years, with the rate reduced to 20 cents per kilowatt hour from the 1st of July 2011 and capacity capped at 150 megawatts. The feed-in tariff scheme was enormously successful. On the 1st of January 2009, prior to its introduction, there were 2,554 rooftop solar installations in Western Australia. Following its introduction in 2010, there were 36,004 on the 1st of January 2011 and 130,324 on the 1st of January 2013, immediately prior to the state election. The number continued to increase after the election, despite the conclusion of the scheme. By the 1st of January 2017, there were 220,416 systems, and by the 1st of January 2025, it had escalated to 527,775. In essence, the feed-in tariff had facilitated the development of the rooftop solar industry, contributed to the reduction in unit prices, and highlighted the ongoing financial advantage of installing a rooftop solar system. Of course, I need to acknowledge the escalated cost of the scheme, with the capacity cap being exceeded due to a number of issues. This was an unfortunate outcome of an otherwise excellent policy initiative, and as Minister for Energy, I took full responsibility. In addition to the feed-in tariff, the government invested in a number of other major renewable energy projects. This included the Collier wind farm near Merredin, which I opened in June 2011 with 111 turbines, which added another 206 megawatts of capacity to the Swiss grid. Also, the 10 megawatt utility solar farm in the Midwest, which I opened in October 2012, and was at the time the biggest solar photovoltaic project in the nation, comprising 150 solar panels covering 50 hectares of land. In addition, our government invested tens of millions of dollars into low emissions energy projects through the Low Emissions Energy Development or LEAD Fund. The end result of this investment was a more than doubling of the renewable percentage in the Swiss generation output from less than 4% in 2008 to approximately 10% in 2013. To conclude on the portfolio of energy, the one area that had universal support throughout the sector was the demand for a comprehensive and coordinated appraisal of the direction of energy into the future. With this in mind, in August 2009, I announced that the government would begin to process the development of the Strategic Energy Initiative to secure a sustainable energy sector. The point of the SEI was to take a holistic approach to the development of a long-term energy strategy. We conducted multiple community forums throughout Western Australia and consulted widely with all sectors engaged within the portfolio. On the 28th of August 2012, I released the Strategic Energy Initiative, Energy 2031. The 5 pillars to a more strategic energy pathway were identified as having a diverse and secure energy supply, be proactive in energy planning, develop effective and efficient energy delivery, have informed and responsible energy use, and strong engagement in the capacity building. The pathways identified in Energy 2031 still hold true today, and I will seek leave to table a copy of that report, President. In conclusion, despite my initial reticence, I found the energy portfolio to be dynamic and rewarding, and I thoroughly enjoyed my tenure as Minister. Moving on to the training portfolio. While not education, it was closely related, and I relished the opportunity to have an impact in such a crucial area. Having taught primarily at the senior secondary level for 23 years, I was extremely mindful of the role performed by the training in our education system. For generations, our entire education system had been led by the nose by universities. Nonsensically, an abundance of the core curriculum had been generated toward providing an outcome which led to university entrance. This was despite the fact that historically, only approximately 1/3 of our students actually chose a university pathway post-compulsory schooling. While there had been some dismantling of this mindset in the previous decade, this culture had been ingrained throughout our society for generations, and there still existed a widely held and yet misguided notion that anything short of a university degree was an inferior career pathway. For many years, many students left school in Year 10 or the equivalent and either got an apprenticeship or job, while the majority that continued to complete Years 11 or 12 strive for university entrance. A combination of parental, peer and societal pressure often meant multiple students continued with ATAR equivalent courses when it would have been far more appropriate for them to choose a vocational pathway. I was intent upon doing my level best to alter that mindset to ensure that students recognise that a training qualification should not be viewed as subservient to an ATAR pathway. Rather, it should be regarded as a treasured possession. It would provide job security for life as well as opening doors for employment all over the world. With this in mind, after numerous conversations with Premier Colin Barnett, in an effort to raise the profile of training, in August of 2009, our government announced the establishment of a standalone Department of Training and Workforce Development, which would be discrete from the Department of Education. This would ensure that there would be a more dedicated and focused delivery of training services to the community. Inevitably, with the combined Education and Training Department, the overwhelming focus of attention would be directed to the former, with the latter being a poor cousin within the relationship. The announcement would ensure that training received the attention that it so richly deserved. Suffice to say, the unanimous consensus of opinion within the training sector agreed with this decision. I acknowledge and I thank the inaugural Director-General of the Department of Training and Workforce Development, Dr Ruth Sheehan, for her guidance, professionalism and support in her new role. I very much enjoyed working with Ruth and her entire team in meeting the unique challenges of the new department. Also in my pursuit to elevate the status of training, in September 2010 I opened the inaugural Skills West Expo. I was conscious of the minimum attention provided to training and skills throughout the media and the community. With this in mind, I approached the West Australian newspaper to seek their support in promoting training as an avenue to a valued qualification. Then Chief Executive Officer Chris Wharton was very interested, and we subsequently agreed to the establishment of the Skills West Expo, a joint initiative between the Department of Training and Workforce Development and the West Australian newspaper. The West Australian also agreed to regularly print a success story of a trainee or apprentice to highlight the advantage of this career pathway. The inaugural Skills West Expo was a phenomenal success, with literally tens of thousands of students and other West Australians taking advantage of more than 100 exhibitors. I'm delighted that the Expo has become a permanent fixture on the training calendar and has most definitely provided positive profile for the sector, as well as a stimulus for thousands of students to consider a training pathway. Another area that was personally extremely significant to me was to provide training opportunities for Aboriginal people. From the moment that I was appointed Minister for Training in 2008, I informed the Director-General of the Department of Education and Training, Sharon O'Neill, that initiatives to promote opportunities for Aboriginal people was one of my top priorities. Although I'm not Aboriginal, I've always had a deep personal affection toward and commitment to Aboriginal people. From a very young boy, I was always conscious of the enormous disparity between the quality of life experienced by most Aboriginal people and their non-Aboriginal counterparts. With this background in mind, I now found myself in a unique position where I could actually make a difference to the opportunities available to Aboriginal people. I commenced the process through the establishment of the Training Together, Working Together Committee in September 2009. This was a vehicle for consultation and collaboration with training providers, government agencies and Aboriginal people to ascertain more effective transition points for Aboriginal people from training to the workforce. Co-chaired by the Chair and Deputy Chair of the State Training Board, Keith Spence and Dr Sue Gordon. The committee and myself travelled throughout Western Australia to access the views of literally thousands of stakeholders in the training and employment sectors and multiple Aboriginal groups. The outcome of this comprehensive consultation process was the Aboriginal Workforce Development Strategy, which I launched at the Training Together, Working Together Summit on the 9th of June 2010. The most fundamental recommendation to stem from the process was to oversee a more holistic, systemic, statewide approach to training Aboriginal people that would lead to successful employment outcomes. The manner in which this could most effectively be achieved would be through the establishment of a discrete workforce development centre dedicated specifically to Aboriginal people from training to the workforce. Also, the establishment of 4 discrete Aboriginal regional hubs to supplement the work being done through the coordinating centre. Consequently, I opened the main Aboriginal Workforce Development Centre in Murray Street, Perth, followed by regional hubs in Kalgoorlie, Bunbury, Geraldton and Broome. These centres were a conduit between Aboriginal people, training providers and employers. This is exactly what Aboriginal people had requested and our government had delivered. I regularly visited each of these centres whenever possible, and I was delighted with the work that they were doing and the results that they were achieving. Staffed almost exclusively by Aboriginal people, they assisted thousands in their transition from training to employment. In recognition of the success of the Aboriginal Workforce Development Centres, they won the Excellence in Public Sector Management's Premier's Award in 2012. I am disappointed that in 2017 the incoming government closed these Aboriginal Workforce Development Centres and morphed them back into the General Jobs and Skills Centres, formerly the Workforce Development Centres. In addition, in response to the recommendations of the strategy, we created positions for mentors and role models to assist Aboriginal people into employment. Also, with regard to Aboriginal people, in 2008, I announced the establishment of the Aboriginal School-Based Training Program with an investment of $11.5 million. In addition to the entrenched basic work readiness skills in alternative options, this program provided Aboriginal students with both public and private secondary schools with valuable and essential mentoring and pastoral care support. Given the enduring challenge of providing a skilled workforce for our diverse and geographically disparate population, I personally spent a considerable amount of time accessing the views from a range of training and community stakeholders. I also utilised the considerable expertise of the State Training Board in developing a framework for initiatives. I'd like to acknowledge and thank the then Chair, Keith Spence, and Deputy Chair, Dr Sue Gordon, and members of the State Training Board for their valued support and advice. Over this period, I released 4 comprehensive documents to provide some clarity with regard to policy direction for the training sector. Training WA, Planning for the Future 2009 to 2018, Skilling WA, a workforce development plan for Western Australia, the West Australian Skilled Migration Strategy, and the Training Together Working Together document. Having recently reread each of these documents, the challenges and suggested policy options are as relevant today as they were 15 years ago. They represent a cohesive framework of policy direction from training providers, employers, industry groups and government. And, President, I will seek leave to table those 4 reports. To conclude on training, given the significance of the sector to the prosperity of our nation, as a relevant minister, I was totally perplexed as to the limited cooperation and cohesion with regard to decision-making between federal and state jurisdictions, regardless of the political persuasion of the government, on developing a master plan to establish a national skilled workforce. My view has not altered in the 13 years since I relinquished the training and workforce development portfolio. While a lack of coordination between jurisdictions on training frustrated me from my appointment as Minister, it was solidified following my appointment as National Chair of the Workforce Development, Supply and Demand Principal Committee in 2010. The committee was established as part of the new governance structure for the Ministerial Council on Tertiary Education and Employment. While there is some coordination between jurisdictions in training surrounding standards, its implementation is sporadic, and data sharing is limited at best and does not value add to creating an effective skilled workforce. Coupled with these issues, the federal government is responsible for determining skilled occupation lists, and there is frequently dispute between the requirements of skill sets as determined by individual states and those provided by the Commonwealth. Quite frankly, if we are to overcome the multiple impediments to furnishing a comprehensive skilled workforce in Australia, there needs to be an extensive overhaul of the manner in which we deal with this issue. This restructure will require the imprimatur of all jurisdictions in order that we can eradicate the ineffective silo approach to decision-making which currently exists. Until bold decisions are made in this area, Australia is going to limp along for generations and continue to rely upon sporadic bursts of migrants in specific skill areas without solving the problem. This approach has been used for decades. It is not working. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken arm. Having said this, I thoroughly enjoyed my tenure as Minister for Training and Workforce Development, and I'm extremely grateful to the entire sector for their support. Moving on, I was delighted to be appointed Minister for Aboriginal Affairs in December 2010, a position that I retained until our government was defeated in at the March 2017 election. I previously mentioned my inherent commitment to Aboriginal people, and I saw my elevation to the role as Minister to be an extraordinary privilege. I've also mentioned some initiatives that we achieved in Aboriginal people in the training portfolio, and I'll do likewise with education. Suffice to say, ironically, upon my appointment, it became rapidly apparent to me the direct influence of the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs can have on Aboriginal people was minimal. This constantly frustrated me in my new role. In essence, it became patently obvious to me that a silo approach exists within the machinery government in terms of developing effective strategies to improve the quality of life for Aboriginal people. While the intent of respective departments was quite honourable, many of the programs being implemented would elicit a short-term effect at best and tokenism at worst. While the Aboriginal Affairs Coordinating Committee exists and consists of the Directors General of the major government departments, it has minuscule authority and accountability. In the aftermath of the government's re-election in 2013, while I was extremely keen to retain the Aboriginal Affairs portfolio, I did express my frustration with the role to the Premier. Essentially, I felt that the position as it then stood was redundant. He was receptive to my concerns, and collectively we agreed to the establishment of an Aboriginal Affairs Cabinet Subcommittee to drive better coordination across government. As Minister for Aboriginal Affairs and Education, I chaired the Cabinet Subcommittee, comprising the Minister for Health, Mental Health, Police, Corrective Services, Child Protection, Lands and Regional Development and Culture and the Arts and their respective Directors General. All policy initiatives surrounding Aboriginal affairs required the endorsement of the subcommittee. I was delighted with the outcomes that emanated from this body. It literally changed the mindset of government decision-making with regard to Aboriginal affairs, in that producing tangible outcomes were required as an imperative of any policy initiative. I was extremely disappointed that the incoming government abandoned the subcommittee in 2017. Cheers, mate. I feel that retaining this body would have ensured that there was a bipartisan commitment to do things differently, to doing things more effectively for Aboriginal people, as opposed to the antiquated formula that hasn't worked for generations. Despite it being a statutory authority, one of the pivotal Aboriginal advisory bodies that had been dormant for the entirety of the previous Labor government was the West Australian Aboriginal Advisory Council. My predecessor in the role, the Honourable Kim Hames, had resurrected the body when we took office in 2008. During my tenure as Minister, I joined the Council at the beginning of each of their meetings, and the government adopted many of the recommendations in terms of policy and program initiatives. This council was comprised of entirely Aboriginal people. It was literally a voice for Aboriginal people. Having endured a divisive and bruising national debate on providing Aboriginal people with a voice, we actually have such a body in Western Australia. If there is a genuine motivation to improve Aboriginal outcomes, future governments could do a lot worse than to further empower and promote this body. With regards to policy initiatives, one of the specific programs that existed within the Department of Aboriginal Affairs was the Partnership, Acceptance, Learning and Sharing, or the PALS program. It's a wonderful program that encourages all Western Australian schools to develop projects that promote and advance reconciliation. The projects were many and varied and included drama productions, artwork, visits by elders, Aboriginal language development programs and many more. I strongly promoted the expansion of the program throughout our schools and each year invited the finalists to Parliament House, where all members of the Legislative Council and Legislative Assembly were invited to interact with the participants. Less than 80 schools participated in the PALS program in 2010, and that had increased to over 500 by 2016. To conclude on Aboriginal affairs, as Minister, while I genuinely attempted to do all that I possibly could to close the gap, what I achieved was hopelessly inadequate. Unfortunately, the same must be said of virtually every single current and former Minister for Aboriginal Affairs in every single jurisdiction throughout the nation. This is not intended to be a target criticism, it is a depressing reality. I'm sure that every one of these ministers acted with honourable intent to achieve exactly the same outcomes, to close the gap, to drive reform in service delivery for all of our Aboriginal Australians, so that there is no gap to close. Rather, that the exceptional opportunities and quality of life that exist for non-Aboriginal Australians are equally available for our Aboriginal brothers and sisters. I'm extremely confident that nobody wants the unacceptably low graduation rates that currently exist for Aboriginal students, nor appalling school attendance statistics for Aboriginal students, nor alarming health statistics, nor lack of adequate housing, nor disgraceful incarceration rates, nor elevated substance abuse amongst our Aboriginal people. We're now well into the 21st century and that there has been little substantial improvement for generations in many of these areas for the oldest living culture on the face of the earth. Until we adopt a holistic approach to decision-making, I despair that things are not going to improve in the short to medium term. The ad hoc silo approach with ticker-box programs haven't worked. In my entire 6.5 years as Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, there was not one National Aboriginal Affairs Ministerial Council meeting, as there is with virtually every other policy area. Why not? I desperately wanted this to change and I expressed my views on a regular basis to respected federal colleagues of both political persuasions. We definitely need a seismic shift in our approach to service delivery for Aboriginal people, or unfortunately, in 10, 20, even 50 years' time, we'll continue to be tut-tutting and shaking our heads and reflecting upon the unfortunate situation with Aboriginal people. And then we'll continue to revert to the age-old cliche that nothing can be done as a pathetic excuse. I'm sorry that I couldn't have done more to assist Aboriginal people. Moving on, well, previously mentioned, well, I'd been disappointed that I wasn't appointed Minister for Education when the Liberal National Parties won government in 2008. Upon reflection, it definitely provided me with an opportunity to diversify. Having said this, on the 29th of June 2012, when I'd been summoned to the Premier's office, I was anxiously hoping that would be to offer me the education portfolio. While I was relishing my current role, my heart and soul rested most comfortably with education. Suffice to say, I left the Premier's office on that Friday a happy man, and the following Thursday it was announced. In addition to education, I would retain energy and Aboriginal affairs and relinquish training and workforce development until the election in March of 2013. As a lifelong educator, I was extremely cognisant of the role of a quality education in a child's life. Ideally, in a perfect world, our education system should provide an environment whereby every single child is significant, whereby their weaknesses are addressed and their strengths enhanced. It should be a system that assists every student to be motivated and interested, to be resilient and to be compassionate. In short, the perfect education system effectively prepares every single student for the multiple challenges that they confront, both professionally and personally, at the conclusion of their compulsory years of schooling. As I reflected upon the new opportunity in front of me over the ensuing few days, I committed myself to that goal. As always, this would require waking up every single day committed to being the best that I could be to make this aspiration a reality. I knew that this phenomenal opportunity could not be condensed into my exclusive thought processes. I would need the wisdom and experience of multiple people throughout the sector. With this mindset established, I met with the Director-General Sharon O'Neill and the Executive of the Department of Education the day after my appointment, and we discussed the areas that were most prominent on my mind and those confronting the sector. In short, the priority areas were the expansion of independent public schools, a reform of senior secondary curriculum and associated assessment procedures, funding for public schools, staffing, assisting disengaged students, and of course, Aboriginal education. Independent public schools was a bold policy initiative which the Liberal Party had taken to the 2008 state election. As the Shadow Minister for Education leading to the election, I spent a considerable amount of time constructing a framework for the overall policy. The stimulus for the policy emerged from my experience in teaching. As a product of the public education system at North Kalgoorlie Primary School and Eastern Goldfields Senior High School, or EG, I previously taught in the public sector, John Curtin Senior High School and Les Murdy Senior High School, Presbyterian Ladies College and Scotch College. My sister and a number of my friends were also teachers, so this wonderful profession was a pivotal component of my life. At that time, there were a number of significant issues that consumed the portfolio. The purest form of outcomes-based education, or OBE, with the associated levels as an assessment discriminator, was being implemented across the state and was being met with fierce opposition. In addition, there was a major shortage of teachers who at the time were the lowest paid in the nation, and there was also significant issues with the creation of the new Teachers Registration Board. Coupled with these issues was a tsunami of students who were leaving the public education system for independent or Catholic education schools. While choice of schooling always has been and should be a choice for parents and students, the magnitude of the shift was quite alarming, and to me it represented more ingrained issues within our public education system. What was the stimulus for this exodus? The same or very similar curriculum was being delivered in all systems. All teachers graduated from the same universities and ATAR standards were moderated and standardised by the same body, and yet the flood of students away from public schools was accelerating. Personally, I felt the issues fundamentally surrounded decision-making on all levels of pedagogy. Decisions on staff selection, decisions on budget priorities, decisions on course delivery, decisions on uniforms, and primarily, who was making these decisions. After all, we're all a product of the decisions that we make. These decisions and the like have been made in the non-government sector by individual schools for generations, and yet in the government system, they continued to be decided upon almost exclusively from head office in East Perth. Surely a principal in Kalgoorlie would be best placed to decide upon the most appropriate staffing profile for their school. Surely a principal in Midland would be best placed to determine the priorities of their school, be it a literacy numeracy specialist or an additional education assistant. Equally, surely the parents, staff and students at a school in Kingsley would be best qualified to choose their uniform or school motto and ethos. Providing more autonomy for government schools had been debated for decades. However, there had been negligible progress throughout the nation. With this mindset, I established a small advisory group of experienced public school executive staff. Melinda Hayes, Neil McNeil and Stephen Silcox, and along with Valerie Gould, the CEO of the Association of Independent Schools in WA, we began the process. Over 18 months, we met regularly and sought the views from multiple teachers, parents and administrators. The end product of this work was a document entitled Revitalising Public Education, which the Liberal Party took the 2008 election. It was a comprehensive document which committed to a massive injection of funds to improve tired and dilapidated public schools, a vast expansion of pastoral care initiatives, including doubling the number of psychologists and chaplains, significantly increasing teachers' pay and almost doubling the boarding away from home allowance. In addition, the centrepiece of the document was a commitment to provide significantly more autonomy to public schools through the Empowering Local Schools policy. The predominant features of this policy being that schools will be empowered to select their own staff and have control over their funding priorities, and to enhance the role of parents and the community in the decision-making process. This policy was the genesis of the independent public schools reform. A considerable amount of time and effort went into creating the Empowering Local Schools document, and I acknowledge and thank all of those that contributed. In particular, I would like to thank most sincerely Melinda, Neil and Stefan and Valerie for their tireless efforts. In addition to the dozens upon dozens of other teachers, administrators, parents and community members who offered advice and feedback, thank you. The Independent Public Schools IPS framework is now an entrenched component of public education in Western Australia and has been used as a model for similar reforms in most other Australian jurisdictions. The implementation of the IPS throughout Western Australia commenced in the first term of the Barnett government, with 34 schools at the end of 2009 and almost 200 by the beginning of 2012. Mindful that the transitioning of IPS status was a voluntary decision for schools, new intakes for the program were always heavily oversubscribed, with public schools over the entire state eager to take advantage of decision-making at the local level. I gave a commitment that every school that strived for IPS status would be granted that privilege. This was almost achieved by the 2017 election, with over 530 schools and 85% of public school students in independent public schools. In November 2013, the Independent Public Schools Initiative won the Premier's Award for Excellence in Public School Management, a recognition of the effectiveness of a real partnership between all stakeholders involved in school communities. Personally, I regard the independent public school reform as the most significant of my time in the Parliament. While there is always room for improvement in any education system, I genuinely feel that the introduction of IPS has value added to public education in Western Australia. I'm confident, noting that from 2013, Western Australia was the only state in the nation that witnessed an increase in enrolments in public schools, that this can largely be attributed to the introduction of the IPS model. This increase in student numbers was most profound in IPS schools. Funding of education is a perennial issue for any incoming government. When the Liberal National parties assumed the government benches in September 2008, as mentioned, Western Australian teachers were the lowest paid in the nation, and our school resourcing was also close to the bottom. An election commitment of $120 million commenced the rapid rise of teacher salaries to ensure that they were by far the highest paid in the nation by 2017. In terms of resourcing of our schools, the model that had existed for decades had reached its use-by date. To be frank, there was absolutely no science behind the existing funding model. There existed basically a one-size-fits-all approach to dollars allocated per student and long-held sweetheart deals for numerous schools. A report by Professor Richard Teese from the University of Melbourne reinforced these points and recommended wholesale change to schools funding. Professor Teese's report reinforced a significant horizontal and vertical imbalance that existed between our public schools. The vertical imbalance indicated a massive issue with regard to existing inappropriate percentage of funding for each level of schooling, given the disparity involved in the cost of early childhood versus primary versus middle schooling and finally upper secondary education. The horizontal imbalance clarified the long-held view that schools with a similar cohort of students were often funded at widely disparate quantities. While we were spending an enormous amount of money within the education budget, it was apparent that these dollars were definitely not being utilised either efficiently or as effectively as they should be. It was time to change this approach. Consequently, in July 2014, I announced a new, more appropriate funding model for Western Australian public schools. The Student-Centred Funding Model, or SCFM, ensured base funding for kindergarten students, pre-primary to year 3, years 4 to 6, years 7 to 10 and years 11 to 12. Then individual students would be provided with additional funding based upon the need of supplementary support. The targeted categories were Aboriginal students, students with English as a second language, students with a disability, students from a low socioeconomic background and students from the regions. In addition, schools would be provided with additional funds for targeted initiatives such as the Gifted and Talented program. In short, at last, without discrimination, the money was following the child. All public schools throughout Western Australia were then furnished with a one-line budget which provided certainty for principals and finance officers. The SCFM was extremely well received by schools and has since been replicated by most other Australian jurisdictions. Moving on, one area that had captured the imagination of the federal education debate for years was over the introduction of a national curriculum. Logically and understandably, there was a considerable level of derision voiced from parochial elements of debate in all jurisdictions. However, given the rapid rise in the transitionary component of the Australian population and the considerable competition in the burgeoning tertiary sector, there was also substantial support for the establishment of a comprehensive and standardised curriculum across the nation. After almost a decade of debate, in mid-2012, the Ministerial Council for Education was prepared to endorse the principles for a national curriculum. As it happened, that particular MINCO just happened to be a month following my appointment as the West Australian Education Minister. And given the rotational procedure of the chair, I found myself presiding over the final debate. While harbouring my own reservations of establishing such a comprehensive reform, I also sought the advice of the head of the Curriculum and Standards Authority, Alan Blagaish, and he shared not only my concerns but also informed me that a number of other jurisdictions had similar apprehensions. Personally, while I saw merit in the concept of a national curriculum, given the fact that much of the content in all jurisdictions was very similar, I felt quite uncomfortable with the intransigent nature of much of the composition of the final determination. Quite simply, I preferred a model which would allow for individual states and territories to adapt the curriculum to their unique conditions. Consequently, rather than face the embarrassment of chairing my first ministerial council meeting, whereby I would oppose a crucial motion, my counterparts in every other jurisdiction, including the federal government, supported my amendment to include the concept of adopting and adapting the national curriculum. Essentially, this meant that the national curriculum was unanimously adopted with the caveat that individual jurisdictions could adapt the content to suit their unique conditions. I feel it was a sensible amendment and it was warmly welcomed throughout the education sector. I'd like to thank Alan Blagaish for his valued advice and support during that crucial national debate. Another area associated with curriculum that gained my attention as incoming Education Minister was with secondary graduation rates. As previously mentioned, the overall school curriculum had just laboured through a bruising debate over the introduction of a purist form of outcomes-based education, or OBE. The Liberal Party went into the 2008 election committed to re-establishing content into the syllabus, as well as abolishing the levels associated with assessing the progress of a student and reverting to percentages. That policy was implemented immediately following the change of government. However, by 2012, there still existed vague and disjointed course structures and assessment procedures at the senior secondary level. In addition, there was a growing concern amongst universities and employers about lowering literacy and numeracy standards in graduating students. It was apparent to me, as the dust settled on the OBE debacle, that we needed a reset with regard to secondary education. We needed to establish some rigour and integrity within both our curriculum, our assessment tools and the criteria for graduation. Consequently, in August of 2012, I tasked Alan Blagaish to establish a committee to conduct a 3-month review of the existing curriculum and graduation levels at the senior secondary level. The committee was created within a week, comprising senior education figures from all sectors, and was chaired by Emeritus Professor Patrick Armott. In the interim, I spent a considerable amount of time personally consulting with various stakeholders, including the universities, training providers, the CCI, CME, the State School Teachers Union of Western Australia, Principals Associations, ASWA, that's the Association of Independent Schools Western Australia, and Catholic Education. In December 2012, the committee provided me with its report titled Responding and Adapting. The findings were compelling and reinforced the widely held belief that significant changes to our senior secondary level of education were essential and needed to be implemented as a matter of urgency. In short, the existing Stage 1, Stage 2 and Stage 3 courses of study were producing perverse outcomes in terms of secondary graduation, with multiple students choosing the least challenging Stage 1 courses and abandoning the alternatives. In addition, unacceptably low levels of literacy and numeracy were being demonstrated by students who had actually achieved a AA Certificate of Education, or a WACE. Finally, over 5,000 students were completing Year 12 without any viable pathway to further study or employment. And I will seek leave to table that report, President. Consequently, in January 2013, I announced significant changes to the curriculum and graduation requirements at the senior secondary level. From 2015, in order to receive a WACE upon graduation, a student would need to demonstrate a minimum literacy and numeracy standard through an online literacy and numeracy assessment, or the OLNA, which would be mapped to Level 3 of the Australian Core Skills Framework, the minimum entry for TAFE, and would have achieved either an ATAR or a Certificate 2 qualification. This would ensure that all students were much better prepared for life beyond compulsory schooling, either through further study or employment. These changes were extremely well received throughout the education sector, universities, training providers and employers. To move on, I was delighted with the reforms that we were introducing at the exit level of a child's education. However, I was cognisant of the fact that of even greater significance were the entry levels. As previously mentioned, for generations, our entire education system had been driven by requirements for university entrance. However, I felt if we got the early intervention process right, the exit outcome will take care of itself. Students would be best prepared to confront the requirements of university or an apprenticeship or a certificate qualification or whichever pathway they chose. With this in mind, I did all that I could to improve Western Australia's early intervention opportunities for our students. My first act was to make pre-primary school compulsory for all students in WA. While most students were already enrolled in pre-primary, the passing of the School Education Amendment Bill in November 2012 made it compulsory. The passing of this bill ensured that every child of pre-primary level age had access to a high-quality, full-time program, as they would be guaranteed a place at their local primary school. Coupled with this change, every child was then given on-entry assessment, which included aspects of oral language, vocabulary, comprehension, writing, counting, ordering, early spatial awareness and simple measurement comparisons. This testing would greatly benefit the teacher's capacity to prepare for every child. Another initiative with early intervention was the establishment of 16 child and parent centres. Over 2014 to 2015, I opened each of these centres, all at primary schools within a low socioeconomic area. A child's education commences at birth, and it is imperative that we provide all children with the opportunity to develop the education and social skills to succeed at school and beyond. While the child's parents have primary responsibility for their early years development, in many instances in contemporary society, some families require additional support. Amongst other services, the Child and Parent Centres offered parenting workshops, child maternal health services, early learning programs, cultural programs, antenatal classes, psychological counselling and family support. While each centre was located at a primary school, their services were provided to a broad range of families throughout multiple feeder schools. They are operating in partnership with non-government organisations such as Nagala and Anglicare WA. I spent an enormous amount of time visiting these centres, and after engaging with the children, their parents and the staff, I always felt I left feeling encouraged. They were definitely having a positive impact upon the entire community. While I was at pains not to interfere with the working formula, after multiple visits, I did recommend that we increase the level of literacy and numeracy programs, which was willingly endorsed across all centres. Shortly after the opening of our 16 child and parent centres, the federal government decided that they were such a successful model to replicate. They were a successful model to replicate. Consequently, they opened 5 of their own child and family centres in Halls Creek, Fitzroy Crossing, Kununurra, Roebourne and Swan. Unfortunately and disappointingly, they were destined to be short-lived due to financial pressures. I couldn't conceive that we could close these centres given the positive impact that they were having upon their local communities. Thus, given the infrastructure was already in place, I pleaded with the Director-General to request that she might find a bit of leftover cash in the bottom drawer to retain them and incorporate them into our early childhood family. I was extremely grateful that she was able to accommodate my request, and in June of 2015, the 5 former federal centres became child and parent centres, bringing the total in Western Australia to 21. In an increasingly complex society, providing early intervention and support to the children and their parents in some of our most challenging communities has been both positive and effective. While a significant number of the clientele that engaged with the child and parent centres were Aboriginal, I felt that we needed a framework that was specifically designed to assist these children. Consequently, in 2015, I announced the establishment of programs for 3-year-old Aboriginal children, delivered through 37 primary schools, to be called KindyLink. The program would provide early intervention literacy and numeracy support, cultural awareness and parenting workshops. It was a perfect example of targeted early intervention in practice. We could go on for decades and decades and continue to bemoan the lack of academic progress of Aboriginal students, pointing to the well below average NAPLAN results, alarming attendance records and parlous graduation rates. However, this is a convenient excuse for a system that has failed our Aboriginal Australians for generations. I thank the current government for continuing this program, and I strongly encourage future administrations to actually expand KindyLink to ensure that it is available to an even more comprehensive model to every 3-year-old Aboriginal child in Western Australia. In addition, although not exclusively early intervention, I introduced 2 initiatives in an effort to assist staff and students when working and integrating with Aboriginal students. In November 2015, I launched the Aboriginal Cultural Standards Framework, which was the first of its kind in the nation and was developed by the Department of Education in coordination with the Aboriginal Affairs Coordinating Committee, which I chaired, along with valuable input from Professor Collier Pro-Vice-Chancellor at Edith Cowan University. The framework is now embedded in Western Australia's public schools that provides direction for them to become culturally responsive to their Aboriginal students and communities. And I'll seek leave to table that framework, President. The second initiative was the establishment of the Elders in Residence program to assist in building stronger relationships with Aboriginal communities and their families. The first 2 elders were Professor Colleen Hayward and Ian Trust as chair of the WA Aboriginal Advisory Council, and they spent time building stronger relationships with Aboriginal people, as well as contributing to staff development and leading consultations between schools and communities to help break down barriers. Also, with regard to early intervention at the request of the early childhood sector, in 2014 I launched the inaugural kindergarten curriculum guidelines. To this date, kindergarten teachers had been largely left to their own devices with little direction or clarity provided to them in terms of their learning content. The School Curriculum and Standards Authority consulted widely with teachers and associated early childhood organisations in developing the guidelines. The guidelines focused on promoting 5 areas of learning and development, being identity, connecting and contributing, wellbeing, learning and thinking and communicating. Teachers were provided with the flexibility to adjust the guidelines as appropriate to meet the individual needs of their students. Again, the intent of this initiative was to provide direction and to enhance the significance of the early years of a child's education. I genuinely feel that the initiatives that our government introduced to enhance early intervention strategies have significantly improved our overall education system. To move on, one of the most profound challenges that has faced the education sector in the past few decades has been the seismic shift in the role of teachers. When I first entered the classroom as a chalkie in 1981, the vast majority of my time was consumed with curriculum and associated assessment. Pastoral care was primarily punitive and involved the issuing of detentions and sending the more recalcitrant students to the deputy principal. By the time that I left the profession in 2005, after 23 wonderful years, that symmetry had significantly altered. While curriculum still retained the predominance of my time and that of my colleagues, the fabric of our society had undergone a quantum shift, and as a result, the role of the classroom teacher was much more prominently involved in the pastoral care of students. It wasn't purely the usual suspects of students that brought with them to school a raft of social and emotional baggage. In fact, this was more the norm than the exception. Such challenges as the breakdown of the traditional family structure, coupled with the use of social media by students as a vehicle for a more sophisticated bullying, as well as dramatically increased parental access to schools, has placed enormous additional responsibility on the shoulders of contemporary teachers. With this background in mind, the Liberal Party entered the 2008 election with a raft of policies to address the pressures facing our teachers and schools. These policies included increasing the number of school psychologists by 50, significantly increasing funding for behaviour management programs and specialists, doubling the number of school chaplains and increased funding for the non-government curriculum and re-education in education or care schools. While some of these initiatives were implemented in our first term of government, we still had enormous challenges in terms of providing sufficient pastoral care for an increasing cohort of disengaged and troubled students. The school chaplaincy program is an excellent service that had been almost exclusively delivered by youth care for many years. While there had been some disquiet about the use of chaplains in our schools, this view was not supported by almost all of our public schools. The role of the chaplain is to provide social and emotional support for students, teachers and support staff and parents and the overall school community. Their role is unique compared with that of school psychologists and counsellors and even deputy principals. More often than not, those that seek the support and guidance of a chaplain feel more comfortable in a less formal environment. It must be remembered that accessing the services of a chaplain by a school is entirely voluntary. During my entire tenure as a minister, on no occasion did I ever have a school with an existing chaplain say that they didn't want them. On the contrary, I had multiple schools request additional time for their chaplain. In 2007, as Shadow Minister for Education, I promised the existing CEO of Youth Care, Stanley Jayarash, that I would provide a chaplain for every public school that wanted one. There were just over 200 chaplains in our school in 2008 and almost 550 in 2017. Every public school that wanted a chaplain had one. Of course, there is a cohort of disengaged students with whom the raft of pastoral care support services would not be sufficient or effective. This group have seen an exponential increase in the past 20 years. The majority of these students are not attuned to mainstream schooling, and some of them actually fall into the juvenile justice system. With this in mind, our education system has evolved to cater for them, although this has been primarily through the curriculum and re-education in educational care schools. In 2008, there were 5 care schools delivered through the independent sector and 2 through Catholic education. The funding for these schools was provided by the federal government, and unfortunately in 2008 it had been cut. Our incoming government met the financial shortfall and the schools remained operational. Upon taking the education portfolio in 2012, I announced a significant increase in funding for the care schools to ensure that they were adequately resourced to meet a rapidly growing demand. There were 25 care schools, either standalone or hubs in Western Australia. There were 25 care schools, either standalone or hubs in Western Australia in 2017. While I was keen to support the care schools, I was also cognisant of the need to provide as much support as possible for disengaged students in public schools. There had been a growing propensity throughout public schools to transfer these students directly to the care schools as opposed to dealing with them within their own sector. With this in mind, I had some productive discussions with the Director-General as to potential strategies that we could use in the public system. I was keen to establish a standalone public facility, and the Old Midland Primary School was available and perfectly suited. Consequently, at the beginning of 2016, the Midland Learning Academy began operating, providing more intensive educational programs and support for up to 20 students. Each student had their own tailor-made program based upon their individual interests and aspirations. In addition, we opened 13 specialist engagement centres in key locations across Western Australia to support students with complex behavioural and attendance issues. It is absolutely imperative that future governments provide an alternative learning environment for students not suited to mainstream schooling. Excluding these students from school altogether and other punitive measures is completely ineffective. All that this response does is to transfer the problem students onto our streets with their antisocial and at times criminal behaviour until their penalty time has been served, and then they return to school to be even more disruptive. To conclude on the compulsory years of schooling, 2015 stands as testament to the considerable durability of our entire education system. It was a year of enduring reform with a doubling of the number of IPS schools, the introduction of the student-centred funding model, changes to the senior secondary level, the transition of Year 7s to secondary schooling, and the rollout of the national curriculum. The fact that each of these reforms were implemented in an efficient and seamless fashion stands as evidence to the commitment and professionalism of our teachers, education assistants, support staff, administrators and the Education Department. Finally, with regard to the education portfolio, I would like to make some comments about our higher education sector. Western Australia has 5 excellent universities, 4 public institutions, being the University of Western Australia, Curtin University, Murdoch University and Edith Cowan University, and the privately operated Notre Dame University. There has been a long-held belief that 5 universities are too many for a population the size of that of Western Australia. Given the ruthless international competition within the university industry, I'm inclined to agree. The combined resources of 2 or potentially 3 of our universities would definitely value add in terms of course selection, research potential and facilities. However, given the potential parochial variable which is inevitably attached to amalgamations of any institutions or organisations, I simply cannot envisage that occurring in the short to medium term. With this in mind, as incoming chair of WAHEC, West Australia Higher Education Council, when I took on the education portfolio, I sought the views of the Vice-Chancellors to ascertain strategies to improve higher education in our state. This would be included in work being done by a panel chaired by Emeritus Professor Margaret Sears, titled Future Directions for the Role of the State in Higher Education. The panel tabled its final report in February 2013, and it contained a number of recommendations to improve the quality of higher education in Western Australia, including addressing the future demands of the sector, student preparedness for tertiary education, effective collaboration with the vet sector, engagement with the Commonwealth Government, access for Aboriginal students, and amendments to the Universities Act to modernise commercial land use provisions where appropriate. As Chair of WAHEC, I worked closely with all of the universities in the vet sector over the next 2 years and launched the Strategic Plan for Higher Education in Western Australia in September 2015. The key goals of the plan were to increase the percentage of Year 12 students progressing to higher education, to encourage greater equity in higher education participation, to develop a more integrated system of education and training, and to assist in developing more international links to higher education. And I will seek leave to table that report, President. Given that Western Australia attracted less than 8% of international students, the final goal was paramount for the future of higher education in our state. With this in mind, in 2015, I led a delegation of Vice-Chancellors of each of the universities to China and Vietnam and then Indonesia the following year to develop relationships with those countries and our higher education sectors. Also in September 2016, with the strong support of the tertiary sector, I introduced the Universities Legislation Amendment Bill as per the recommendation of the panel. This ensured that Curtin, Murdoch and Edith Cowan universities could use their land for commercial purposes for the first time, something that the University of Western Australia had been doing for decades. Also, as requested by the sector, the bill modernised the composition of the governing bodies of all our universities. I thoroughly enjoyed my tenure as Chair of WAHEC and I was delighted to engage with each of the Vice-Chancellors over the period. I genuinely feel that the moderate changes that our government made to higher education value added to the sector in operating what has become nothing short of a brutal international market. Having said this, I must admit to being a little bemused over recent years as I've watched our universities provide multiple alternative pathways into their institutions other than a required ATAR score. I vividly remember the vitriol and indignation that was exhibited toward one university from the other four in 2015 when it provided early entry for two of its more appealing courses. To the others, this was definitely going to provide a competitive advantage to the university providing early entry. I remember chairing a WAHEC meeting in the eye of the storm and I expressed my concerns at the practice and declared that, if it continued, would be the thin edge of the wedge and that inevitably would become the norm as opposed to the exception. Now, given the advent of online learning offered across the globe as almost a standard practice for some courses by the university sector, and the competition within this multi-billion-dollar industry, secondary students are provided with multiple avenues of early entry to their preferred course. This, coupled with the introduction of, in recent years, of a general set of courses in senior secondary education, which do not have examinations, has witnessed an alarming and yet equally predictable decline in the number of students choosing ATAR courses. Unfortunately, I imagine that this decline will not only continue but will accelerate in coming years, and this will inevitably lead to diminishing educational standards. The former chair of SCASA, Patrick Garnett, completed a report on senior secondary enrolments in Western Australia several years ago, which provided some alarming food for thought and completely reinforced the points that I have made. Unfortunately, the situation has deteriorated further since the completion of this report, and I will seek leave to table that report at a later time. So, upon reflection as my tenure as Minister for Education, I like to think that the policies that our government instituted did value add to our overall education system in Western Australia. The stakes are extremely high in education. We are literally dealing with the lives of our children and ensuring that we present a curriculum and pastoral care support to nurture and craft an environment which is conducive to providing opportunities for all students to thrive and succeed. We simply cannot experiment with thought bubbles and respond to fanatical pressure from ideologues and impose these fads upon our children. Once again, in short, in 2008 we inherited an education system with our schools being amongst the lowest resourced in the nation. Our teachers were lowest paid in the nation. We had mass teacher shortages throughout the state. The curriculum and associated assessment procedures were confused and inefficient. There was an ongoing hemorrhage of students from the public system to non-government schools, and our NAPLAN results were unacceptably low. From the time the Liberal National Government was elected in 2008 until 2017, our schools had received a 70.3% increase in funding to make them the highest resource in the nation by far. Our teachers were the highest paid in the nation by far. We put a teacher in front of every classroom every year we were in government. We had the highest number of education assistants per student in the nation by far, with a 37.7% increase in numbers. Western Australia was the only state in the nation to produce an increase in the numbers of students moving from the non-government schools to public schools, and there had been the largest number of improved mean scores in NAPLAN results in the nation. I absolutely loved every minute of my tenure as Minister for Education. It was the greatest privilege of my life. I can say hand on heart I did everything that I possibly could to ensure that we provided a quality education for every child. I made sure that I consulted and I listened extensively prior to making any final policy decision. I had multiple showdowns with Treasury, that pesky little department that annoys every minister in government. I visited over 700 schools and I literally went to the opening of an envelope, to award nights, exhibitions, fetes, debate finals, association conferences and so on and so on. In addition, once a month I would go back to a secondary school and I would teach either politics or history classes, and then I'd have morning tea with the staff to make sure that I remained grounded. This was one of those opportunities in life that I previously spoke about. I was living the dream. I knew that if I woke up every single day and committed to being the best education minister that I could be, I would never live with regret. I'm in no doubt that there'll be others that'll have a contrary view of my tenure as Minister for Education. In fact, I'll be disappointed if they didn't exist, because that would mean that there's no room for improvement. To the current Minister for Education, I wish her well. And to those who succeed her, regardless of their political persuasion, I wish them well in continuing to evolve our education system into one which provides a framework and an opportunity for every single one of our students to be the best that they can be, regardless of their race, disability, socioeconomic background, geographic location or intellect. One final thing related to education is the role played by former Director-General Sharon O'Neill. Sharon was Director-General for most of my tenure as Minister, first with training until the separation of the departments, then with education. Words cannot express the level of admiration that I have for Sharon. She is the most capable and professional individual that I've ever had the good fortune to work with in any capacity. Given the magnitude of reform that we instituted, particularly in 2015, I'm under no illusion that the implementation of these policies would not have been anywhere near as seamless without Sharon's leadership. I thank her most sincerely for her advice, support and friendship. Now, while this does provide a synopsis of each of my portfolios, it is by no means exhaustive. However, it does capture the most consequential reforms that were implemented during our time in government. With that, President, I seek leave to table those 10 reports I've mentioned.
Is that all of them?
Yep.
Have you finished?
Yep. I seek leave to table them.
Members, the honourable member has sought leave to table the 10 reports he's mentioned in his contribution, and I will, rather than seek leave for all of them, I'll put it as one question. Is leave granted? Aye. Leave is granted. Those reports are tabled.
Thanks, mate. Now to move on from government. Suffice to say, like all of my colleagues and supporters, I was extremely disappointed with the outcome of the 2017 election. Having said this, in politics, the worm always turns, and the voting public of Western Australia had made it clear that it was time to give the other mob a go. Thus, we as Liberals woke up on March the 12th, 2017, disappointed and yet committed to doing all that we could to return to government in 2021. As I commenced my second stint in opposition, my colleagues selected me as Leader of the Opposition in the Legislative Council. I also took on the Shadow Disability Services portfolio, which I thoroughly enjoyed. The makeup of the Legislative Council in the 40th Parliament was extremely diverse. Although the Labor Party had secured a comfortable majority in the Legislative Assembly, they were not afforded a similar privilege in the Legislative Council, finishing 4 members short of a majority. There were 7 non-member parties, which ensured that this was going to be a term of heavy negotiation from all sides. This proved to be correct, with every bill, amendment or motion being the subject of horse trading and negotiation, a perfect example of the role of an effective upper house. I relish the opportunity that this situation presented, while being mindful of the fact that the government definitely had a mandate from the Western Australian public. At times it was like herding goldfish to ensure that we had the numbers. However, I like to think that the end result was improved legislation. I had originally decided to retire from Parliament at the end of my 4th term. This was certainly not as a result of disenchantment nor lack of motivation. I just felt that it might be time to move on. However, following the strong support of our leader, the Honourable Lisa Harvey, as well as my parliamentary colleagues and many members of the Labor Party, I reversed my decision. When I was pre-selected in February 2020, internal polling done by the Liberal Party had us winning at least 6 seats at the March 2021 election, and we only required 9 seats to return to government. This was supported by a 9.4% swing to us in Darling Range by-election, the Darling Range by-election in mid-2018, and an emphatic win in Western Australia in the May 2019 federal election. A month following my pre-selection, the COVID pandemic erupted and completely altered not merely the political landscape, but the very essence of civilisation. Everything that we had previously taken for granted dissolved, and we were confronted with lockdowns, restrictions, shortages, and for the Liberal Party, political irrelevance. Suffice to say, the result of the March 2021 Western Australian election was devastating for the Liberal Party. It was reduced to representation of just 2 members in the Legislative Assembly and 7 in the Legislative Council against a government emboldened with an historic victory. Then, together with our National Party colleagues and a severely reduced crossbench, the daunting task in front of us was to use our limited voices in the Parliament to ensure that the government was accountable while strategising a path to victory. In no way do I question the validity or the reasons for the electoral rout of 2021. I remain firmly of the opinion that such a dominance of both houses of the Parliament by a party of any political persuasion is not a positive outcome for the political process. In fact, it completely diminished the fabric of our bicameral system of government. While I relinquished my role as Leader of the Opposition in the Legislative Council following the defeat, I did totally commit myself to my new portfolio areas of police and corrective services, mindful that this would definitely be my final term. Again, I relish the opportunities to work in my new shadow portfolios of police and corrective services. While I won't reflect upon all of the issues in these portfolios, there is none more important, in my opinion, than Unit 18, a temporary juvenile justice facility created by the Labor government at Casuarina, a prison for hardened adult criminals. The fact that this dreadful facility continues to exist is one of my most profound disappointments in leaving this place. I remain convinced that the government has retained Unit 18 for purely political purposes. The government knows that it is politically palatable to be seen as being tough on crime, including in this instance the exploitation of some of our most marginalised and disengaged youths. This view is shared by some of my own colleagues. However, this doesn't make it right. This is not a Labor nor Liberal issue. This is not a left-wing nor right-wing issue. This is an issue about effective public policy. We are well into the 21st century. Surely we are better than this. Almost all of the youths in Unit 18 have a neurological disorder and a high proportion are Aboriginal. If there has been any decline in youth crime since its establishment, or any reduction in reoffending from the youths that have been incarcerated in Unit 18 during this time, I would reluctantly accept defeat. However, this is not the case. In fact, youth crime has rapidly accelerated over this period, and for the first time in Western Australia's history, 2 youths have suicided in detention, while hundreds of others have attempted self-harm. In addition, there has been an escalation of the transition of youths in detention directly into adult prisons. All that this despicable facility is doing is making the youths more angry, less resilient and better criminals. No, Unit 18 has not worked and it will not work. It is the antithesis of effective rehabilitation. And for one time, I plead with the government to please close Unit 18. So to conclude on my time in Parliament, I will always reflect fondly upon my time as Leader of the House in the 39th Parliament. It was an extraordinary privilege of which I never took for granted. To me, my primary role was to ensure that the government's agenda achieved a seamless passage through the process of the Parliament, while ensuring that the conventions of the Legislative Council were never compromised. As any Leader of the House would acknowledge, one of our most challenging tasks is to educate our colleagues from the other place that we do things a little differently in the Council. During this entire time, and then in my subsequent role as Leader of the Opposition in the Legislative Council immediate following a loss in 2017, and again for the last year, my opposite number was the Honourable Sue Ellery. As with any adversarial position, we did have our moments. However, generally we worked well together and always managed to work our way through any issues, and for this I offer my gratitude to Sue. Finally, the other position that I very much appreciated was as Chair of the Estimates on Financial Operations Committee during the 41st Parliament. The committee system in the Legislative Council is a powerful vehicle for both the scrutiny of legislation and to assist and enhance the performance of the Parliament. During the last Parliament, while the Labor government enjoyed unparalleled power and authority in both houses, the Estimates Committee worked tirelessly to ensure that we fulfilled our oversight obligations. In addition to our budget and annual budget reportings, we conducted an extensive investigation into homelessness in Western Australia and a limited inquiry into greyhound racing. I thank all members of that Estimates Committee and to the entire staff for their valued work over this period. It was a pleasure working with each of you. Of course, like any Member of Parliament, as a member of the North Metropolitan Region, I have been extensively involved with the community over the last 20 years. I have greatly valued the welcome that I've received from the numerous sporting and community groups over this period. I'd like to pay particular tribute to the Cat Haven, where I was Vice Patron from 2009 to 2014, to the mighty West Perth Falcons, where I've been patron since 2011, and of course to my beloved Shenton Park Dogs Refuge, where I've been patron for the past 23 years. Also, I thank the multiple local councils with whom I have worked and have welcomed me to their wonderful citizenship ceremonies, particularly the City of Joondalup, where I have attended almost every ceremony over this period. I'd now like to thank and make a few reflections upon an essential component of our political system, the media. Contemporary media is a completely different beast to the one that existed 20 years ago. Current members may find this difficult to comprehend, but when I commence, the media bench above the President's chair will be completely full every question time and often during the day, as journalists salivated at the prospect of actually securing some revealing facts or figures from the written answers provided. This was in complete contrast to the equivalent process in the Legislative Assembly, where it's often used for juvenile personal attacks and political point scoring. Actual reporting of news and issues has changed significantly over this time. The advent of social media has completely altered the news industry landscape. Gone are the days of prolonged assessment and debate of contemporary issues. Present-day media insist upon instant reporting with issues virtually changing on an hourly basis. There has been a dumbing down of mainstream media as they desperately strive to compete with content posted on social platforms. The younger generation in particular rely almost exclusively on this latter medium for their daily serving of enlightenment. Desperate to remain relevant and maintain profits, mainstream media relentlessly search for the prospect of capturing a gotcha moment to facilitate pages of their daily print or online versions just to keep up with the often meaningless and inaccurate garbage that is constantly spewed on social platforms. In many instances, substance has been replaced by a race to the bottom in terms of time-honoured journalistic standards. This is not assisted by the continual churn of well-meaning and ambitious young journalists who become rapidly disillusioned with the relentless deadlines and low pay and seek greener pastures with resource companies or a minister's office. Having said this, over the past 20 years, there was only one occasion where I felt that one dominant component of the mainstream media in Western Australia got it completely wrong, and that was when they decided that they weren't going to report on or assess the facts. Rather, they were actually going to be active participants in the political process. It involved the internal operations of the Liberal Party, and had my colleagues and myself succumbed to their obsessional pressure, it would have set an extremely dangerous precedent for members of all political persuasion into the future. Personally, apart from one obvious exception, I've always had a relatively positive relationship with journalists. While I may not have been particularly delighted with the slant of many of the articles that they have written, I have appreciated they have a job to do, and on balance, I really can't complain. I acknowledge the challenging tasks that they face, and I thank the numerous journalists that I have interacted with during my parliamentary career. Finally, on the media, I would like to acknowledge Bethany Hyatt for the excellent journalistic work that she has done over more than 20 years reporting on education matters. I frequently engaged with Bethany as Shadow and then Minister for Education, and I always found her to be meticulously professional and determined to focus upon what was important, and that was to act as an informed advocate for education. To conclude, I would like to acknowledge those that have made a valued contribution to my time in Parliament. To begin, I would like to thank the Liberal Party. I would never been elected to the Legislative Council without this magnificent political party. I didn't get elected for 20 years because I'm Peter Collier. I got elected because I was number 2 and then number 1 on the Liberal Party ticket for the North Metropolitan Region for 5 successive elections. The Liberal Party has been a vital component of my entire life. In fact, in the federal election of December 1975, as a 16-year-old, I handed out my first how-to-vote card for Liberal candidate Mick Cotter at the Kalgoorlie Town Hall. At that time, having no idea of the political persuasion of my parents, I was drawn to the principles of limited government and personal initiative represented by the Libs. Moving to Perth for tertiary study just over a year later, I signed up to join the Young Liberals in February 1977 at Orientation Day at the University of Western Australia. Since that memorable day, over the last 48 years, I worked for the party at every single state and federal election, including chairing dozens of campaigns. I'm a life member of the Young Liberal movement and a recipient of the Distinguished Service Award of the Liberal Party. I'm a proud and devoted classic Menzian Liberal. I would never, under any circumstances, do anything to damage this wonderful political party. I'm so grateful to the Liberal Party for all that it represents and providing me with a lifetime of opportunities. At the parliamentary level, I wish I knew State Leader Basil Zemplis and Deputy Leader Libby Mettam, and our entire team every success as they commence the road back to government. Equally, I acknowledge and thank State Director Simon Morgan and State President Carolyn DeRusso for steadying the ship over recent years and for their personal support, and I wish them well as the fight continues. Also, I'm delighted that Senator Slade Brockman and Senator Matt O'Sullivan are in attendance today, and I thank them for their support and friendship, and I wish them and their colleagues every success in their quest to return to government at the federal level. As a grateful member for the North Metropolitan Region, I would like to thank the committed staff who have served in my electorate office over the past 20 years. I've benefited from longevity from a small group of quality people over this period. I sincerely thank Norma Tyler, Colin Edwards, Ruth McEwen, Julie Lloyd, Neil Mattingly and Melinda Poore, most sincerely for the invaluable role that they have played in ensuring that we provided a quality service for the public. Located at Warwick Shopping Centre for almost 19 years, our constant stream of constituents would never inquire as to whether we were Liberal or Labor. Rather, they were concerned about whether we could find them a house in which to sleep, or where to get assistance with their bills or health questions or a multitude of other such issues. Ours has been an effective, salt-of-the-earth electorate office, and this has been due in no uncertain terms by wonderful staff. I sincerely thank all of my team. To the Parliament House staff, I cannot speak highly enough of each and every one of you. Parliament House is such a magnificent place to work, and this is due to the professionalism and demeanour of the entire staff. To the Clerk of the Legislative Council, Sam Hastings, and all of the Chamber staff, and your respective predecessors, to Hansard, to Rob Hunter and the Executive Manager of Parliamentary Services and the entire team, as well as the catering and dining room, security and ground staff, a very sincere thank you. In what is a naturally adversarial environment, you have made coming to work every day an absolute pleasure. Finally, in regard to Parliament House, to the many staff that have tolerated my nicknames and nonsense for the past 20 years, a special acknowledgement and thank you. To my former ministerial staff, represented here today by Michael Tetlow, Deb Bentley, Heather Gabriel and Tara Salerno, I acknowledge and thank you for contributing to one of the most positive and rewarding periods of my life. We had the best ministerial office by far. Each of us had a dedicated role, and yet we gelled, drawn together by a common purpose. We were a rich tapestry of ability and strength, and I can say, hand on heart, I feel that we value added to each of the respective portfolios which we oversaw. While I won't identify all of my former staff, I will acknowledge one, and her name is Catherine Barry, whom I affectionately refer to as Watsy. Her breadth of knowledge and her capacity to comprehend complex issues and policy was second to none. She commenced in my ministerial office on day one as my energy advisor and then reverted to become my chief of staff following the 2013 election and remained in that position until my final day in the role. I'm extremely grateful to Catherine for all that she is and for the essential role that she played in my tenure as a minister. I'm confident that all of my former staff would endorse these comments. To my current and former Liberal Party parliamentary colleagues, I offer my heartfelt thanks. Any work environment has its fair share of characters and levels of energy. However, nothing could possibly replicate the diversity of the composition of parliamentarians. Like any work environment, many of us have had our moments. However, when it is counted, we've always worked through them and ultimately focused upon the main game, being to beat the Labor Party. I'm conscious of the expectations and commitment required of a Member of Parliament, and I am appreciative to all of my colleagues for the enormous personal sacrifice that they've made and the dedication they exhibited to the community, the Parliament and to the Liberal Party. I would like to offer my particular thanks to colleagues from the 39th, 40th and 41st Parliaments for bestowing upon me their confidence to be their leader. It has been an extraordinary privilege, and I'm extremely grateful to all of my colleagues and their predecessors for their valued support. While time prevents me from mentioning each of my Liberal colleagues, I would like to pay tribute to one, and that person is the Honourable Donna Farragher. We came in together and we're going out together. Dare I say it? A couple of washed-up old ministers in the departure lounge. However, we're much more than colleagues. We've been through so much together, both personally and professionally, and I would like to thank Donna most sincerely for her valued support and friendship. As godfather to a wonderful son Harry, devoted Uncle Pete to a daughter Claire and close mate to a husband Scott, I'm confident there will be many more memorable times together ahead of us. I would also like to make special mention and thank most sincerely the Honourable Colin Barnett. I've known Colin for well over 30 years and I regard him as one of my most loyal and valued friends. I'm extremely grateful for the trust that he showed in appointing me as a minister for his entire term as Premier and supporting me into the role as Leader of the House. While it may hold a degree of political convenience for an incoming government to relentlessly condemn their predecessors, historical revisionism inevitably corrects the record. I'm in no doubt that history will reflect most favourably upon the Barnett era, in particular the exceptional legacy of Optus Stadium, Elizabeth Quay, Yagan Square, the Scarborough foreshore, the rebuilt health system and so much more. Western Australia has certainly been enriched as a result of Colin's vision. It was an absolute privilege to serve in government under Colin's leadership. I regularly catch up with him and I'll definitely continue to do so in the years ahead. I also thank my colleagues and predecessors within the National Party. Although the natural complexities of having two distinct political parties competing for a similar constituency, I've always had a tremendous working relationship with my national partners in both government and opposition, and I thank them for their support and friendship. The Liberal and National parties are an effective team and will always govern together in that fashion. In addition, I'd like to thank members of the government and the crossbench and their predecessors. Again, while we've had our moments, as must be expected given the nature of our profession, I have enjoyed and valued your company and friendship. Now, to my friends. In politics, we inherently attract a reasonable quota of the fair weather variety, such as property developers. However, they are no relevance nor consequence to me. No, I'm privileged to have so many loyal people in my life, the valued ships in the night, the bonded friends, many of whom have been with me for the entire distance and are here today. To me, loyalty is the single most preeminent quality of a person. To begin, I acknowledge 5 remarkable women. Cherry Madam, Susan Browning, Leanne McTavish, Victoria Labar and Andrea Mitchell, all of whom were with me at the start but not at the end. All of whom were an indelible component of my life and all of whom I miss terribly. To Cherry, the most beautiful woman in the whole wide world. To Susan, my devoted lifelong friend. To Leanne, my loyal and loved mate. To the extraordinary Victoria Mystique, my treasured second mum. And to my beautiful, beloved soulmate, Andrea. I'd give anything to have you with me here today. Grief is one of those irreconcilable emotions. You never get over it, you just get used to it. Just when you think you've got it under control without invitation or warning, it can resurrect itself and consume you with unparalleled emotional anguish. Never a day goes by when I not grieve for these magnificent women. My world is less perfect without each of them in it. To my many friends, I acknowledge and thank you most sincerely for your invaluable support. Unfortunately, I can't mention everybody, and I apologise for that at the outset. Please don't take it personally. As you all know, my family and friends are sacrosanct in my life. However, in this instance, I would like to acknowledge Rob and Val Kildare and their children, Jane, Georgia and Paul, and their partners, Terry, David and Taran and their families, Margaret and Barry Court and their children, Daniel, Marika, Teresa and Lisa and their partners and families, Neil Mattingly, Naomi Pereira and their children, Riley and Abby, Chris and Carolyn Ellison and their children, Nick, Sienna and Seb, Colin and Cheryl and the Honourable Cheryl Edwards, the Honourable Lisa Harvey and Andrew Matrazik, Liz Reza and Ali Bajet, the Honourable Michael Mission and Lorraine Reason, the Honourable George Cash, Emily and Julian Ambrose, Kelly Roy and Mari Browning, Robin Pennington, Jeremy Buxton, Andrew Cox and Debbie Guest, Barbara Brophy, Phil Chicky and Philip Drake Brockman, Glenn and Mark Barber and their families, Sam, Sue and Len Robert Smith, Julie and Dale Lloyd and their boys, my godson Ethan and Xavier, Mel McTavish and Leanne once again, and their children Mitch, Lauren and Lindley, Faye and Archie Judar, Richard and Ellison Ellis, Brett Raponi and Jill Hammersley, Bradley and Emma Woods, Paul and Donna Broschlager, David DeGarris and Katie Osborne, Sam and Amy Calabresi, Lewis Meyer, Jenna Clark, Peter Alicia and Kimberly Peck, Joanne Fall, Hayden Megan and Frida Gibson, David Wirapunda, David and Rochelle, Michael and Rochelle Tetlow, Jonathan Matthews, James Reid, Peter and Eleanor Moore, Andy Gayson, John Betchman, Tim Walton, Russell and Susan Davis, David Siglin and Giovanna Bartle, and of course to my friends from North Kalgoorlie Primary School and Eastern Goldfield Senior High School, including Lindley Fry and Shane Nicholson, who are here with us today and who would have thought we're still together after all of these years. Finally, to all of my former teaching colleagues and tennis family, and once again to my many friends within the Liberal Party. Thank you. To conclude with my friends, I would like to single out one person and pay special tribute to an extraordinary woman who also happens to be the greatest tennis player of all time and my best friend, and her name is Margaret Court. Margaret was still one of the best tennis players in the world when I first met her 50 years ago. Over this period, we have been through some almighty highs and some extremely challenging lows together. Throughout all of this time, I have known that when I was in the trenches with the missiles hovering above, Margaret will be there beside me to support me, as I would be for her. I could never have achieved what I have in my life, nor survived the challenges that have confronted me, if it hadn't been for the loyalty, support and love of Margaret, and for this I'm eternally grateful. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge my family. I'm so grateful to have to my wonderful parents, Les and Beryl, for providing me with a life of love and unconditional support. Although my dad passed away just over a decade ago, he was the epitome of the term fatherhood, and his words resonate with me every single day. My darling mum is still with us, and likewise, she is a pillar in my life. Despite being in her 90s, she still calls me love. I speak with her every day, and I greatly appreciate her ongoing love and support. I also pay loving tribute to my sisters, Diane and Kerry, and to their husbands, Mark and Ian, and to their respective families. Sibling love is an understatement. We're referring to the Collier kids. Regardless of the storms or sunshine that surround us, we'll always have each other. To all that I have mentioned, to the many others that I haven't, I finished by offering two simple words that appear hopelessly inadequate, and that yet they represent every ounce of gratitude that I could possibly summon. And they are thank you. So this is it. It's finally time to pull down the curtain. I didn't pursue a political career for the celebrity factor, nor the prestige, nor as an avenue to other pursuits. I'm a humble grocer's son from Kalgoorlie who just happened to come into this world with an insatiable passion for tennis, teaching, politics and the Liberal Party. While the time to depart has arrived, it is quite surreal and a little daunting that it's actually happening. I still absolutely love my job and I love my role as a member of the Legislative Council. I still have plenty of fuel in the tank and I still wake up every single day committing to be the best that I can be. With this said, what a perfect time to go out. I'm finishing on my own terms with a wealth of experience and personally, I feel that I'm a better man. So while I'm a little melancholy as I prepare to leave, I'm equally positive about the future because I know without a shadow of a doubt that the best is yet to come. Yeah.
That didn't get very comfortable.